Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
I am not going to giggle with you today, Dan Kent.
That's right.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And
I'm not going to be funny then. I'm not being funny.
All right. Well, listen, we keep it real here on the MuseCast. Welcome, everyone, by the way. We keep it real here on the MuseCast. And today's a day of love, supposedly. And as brothers and sisters in Christ, Dan and I are brothers and sisters in Christ. We were supposed to have a mutual love and respect for one another. But that has been damaged, Dan Kent. You have trampled on the sanctity of our MuseCast relationship, and we need reconciliation.
Uh-oh, what did I do?
Listen, buddy. And I have witnesses. You had a guest on last week. Incredible guest. Danny Churchill. Yes. Love him. Amazing. However, you decided that you were not only going to have Danny as a guest, but you guys were going to take over the show and rename the show and do your own thing. What the heck? When I had a guest on in your absence, he was just a guest. The great Pauletti, he was just a guest. There was no takeover. There was no sabotage. This relationship is damaged, sir.
Well,
damaged.
Hey, look, I'll just say, remember when you had Pauletti on, who's my mentor, who is sort of my theological hero, I said that I would get you back. So
revenge. Oh my gosh.
Learning to love together.
Yeah. And you're supposed to love your enemies, but I'm supposed to be like your bestie, Dan. And look at you just like throwing me aside. Oh, you didn't even do a Nugget time. Like you didn't do the Nugget time dance.
Yeah.
You did there is so much missing. I can't even with you.
Listen, the Nugget thing, you're right. And part of that is because, I've said this before too. You make hosting look so easy, and it's not. It's hard. You got to keep track of a lot of things. But I thought Danny had such great things to say.
He did.
I just wanted to end it with what he said there. And so, yeah, we needed you. So the MuseCast needs Shawna for sure.
Okay. Well, see, reconciliation has occurred. We are good. Yes. See how quickly that works out, folks.
That's right.
Easy peasy. Danny, great sermon that he gave, and then great time with him on the MuseCast. And it was just a scheduling issue as to why you guys went solo off the rails, but it was
off the rails.
You guys did a great job.
Yeah.
But then circle on around to this past weekend, and we got to see Gregory again with a very, I'm just going to say this, Dan, between you and I, don't tell anybody, a very distracting Band-Aid on his face, like the whole time.
Yeah.
What in the world?
I was wondering what that was, we have, especially right now too, because we've got like all of these kind of conspiracies about China weather balloons. And then there's this mysterious Band-Aid on Greg's face. And I don't know if there's some corrupt observation going on from other countries. Who knows? Things are weird right now. So yeah.
We're living in some shaky times. Who knows?
I think Greg is an alien. I think he's an alien from another planet. And we just saw a flaw in his mask and makeup. So, yeah.
And the way that you know that could be true, Dan, is because in person, because I was there in person, you couldn't see it. But when the HD cameras came on, and that's when it was like revealed.
Yep.
You're onto something there. So human, alien, who knows? But the man, Gregory Boyd, did deliver a sermon he entitled Absolute Relativism.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, the title in and of itself, there's much to discuss there. But wow, this was one of those like a couple of pager notes for me, because it was just a lot of good, meaty, rich stuff there. So I think this is a great time for you to land your world famous summary on
Sounds good.
us.
Yeah. Hey, well, you're right. This is our third sermon in this series on deconstruction that we are titling Unraveling Truth. And today or this weekend, Greg talked about basically relativism. And he looked at, right now, and by right now, you have to think of it in terms of like culturally. So in the last 40, 50 years, relativism has been kind of flourishing. And relativism is kind of this idea that all truths are relative. And I think that there's a reason why that's kind of becoming popular right now. Part of it is because, especially in America, where we have basically all of these different cultures trying to live together in the same country, and relativism helps us kind of remain peaceful. And so I think that there's a good reason why it's popular right now. And beyond that, we have also seen how when people stick to like these absolute truth claims, like this is what God this is who God is, this is what God believes, this is what God wants for us, and God absolutely wants us to live in this way, and God absolutely rejects these types of people, and we've seen historically how living under these absolute truth claims ultimately leads to violence. And most of the time, in looking at history, the violence happens within the communities that share absolute truth claims, but also between cultures that have absolute truth claims. And so for that reason, relativism is like, let's just tap the brakes on the absolute truth claims and just live in this idea that truths are not absolute. They're just kind of relative to a person's culture. On top of which, the second kind of reason why Greg said that we are particularly drawn to relativism right now is just the fact that when you look at all of the different religions, and there's like 4,200 religions, and then when you look at each religion, a lot of those end up getting broken down into denominations. And I think there's on one count there's like 40,000 different Christian denominations, and so the question is, if you really believe in absolute truth, you're saying that you have the miraculous good fortune of having the truth amongst all of these 40,000 different possible kind of truth claims. And what are the odds of that? And the odds seem pretty slim that you would be right in that sea of possibility. And then the third thing is, as we have kind of connected with other people in the world, especially now through technology, where we can kind of figure out what these civilizations, these communities are really like, we see just how powerful kind of growing up in a culture is, where our culture conditions and structures our beliefs to a pretty surprising degree. And so I believe certain things about ultimate reality, but how much of that is just because of where I was born, when I was born, and the culture that I was born into? It seems like beliefs are not based on truth as much as they are based on the chance of where I was born and with whom I was born. So those are some of the reasons why Greg kind of outlines that people are drawn to relativism. But he says that even though there are good reasons why people are relativistic, as a worldview and as a system of living, it doesn't really work. And so he gives three reasons why we should question relativism and why we should kind of push back against the urges toward relativism that we might feel inside. So the first one is that obviously relativism right off the bat is sort of self-refuting, because as soon as you say that all beliefs are relative, well, you're making an absolute claim. And so you have to ask the question, is that actually true? Or is that just another one of these beliefs that are relative? And so it kind of collapses in on itself logically right away. But beyond that, to live in this idea that all truths are relative to your culture or whatever, you're sort of going to end up with these unacceptable implications, because we've seen cultures do things that in hindsight, and maybe even during the time that they were doing it, most people could see as devastatingly immoral. And so, for instance, the example that Greg gives is that the Nazis and the extermination of the Jews in their country, and to be a moral relativist is to say, well, we might not see that as true, but in the context of their culture, that they were living out of their truth. And that's really hard to accept that. And then he also gives some other examples of, cultures that are doing things that Greg thinks is immoral, like genital mutilation and things like that. And then the third reason that he gives is that relativism is just impossible to live out, and largely because of the logical incoherence of it. It's impossible to actually live out. And then he finishes with this argument. And it's funny because I get to see behind the scenes on some of this stuff. And this is an argument that Greg has kind of been playing with for a while, and he's been looking for an opportunity to share it. And this is, I think, really a great spot for him to choose. But he gives this argument where he talks about, like, when you look at the world and the violence of the world, and you try to imagine what would the world need to believe in order for there to be peace, in order for us to stop all of these wars that we kind of find ourselves in all the time. We would need like some type of foundational belief to agree to in order for there to be peace. What would that be? Well, relativism is certainly not the belief. And so he argues that the only belief, the only conviction that could lead to world peace would have to be some type of conviction that says that humans have a moral obligation to love one another, and that they have to do this unconditionally. And therefore, if we love one another unconditionally, that means that we would have to rule out any possibility of violence towards the other, because we have this moral obligation to love them. And violence is sort of a kind of an antithetical toward loving them. And what he argues is that, and he looks at John 18:36, where Jesus says, "Look, if I were just here to bring about this kingdom in this world, then my disciples would be fighting you. But the fact that they're not fighting is indicative that they are basing their lives on a different conviction than the convictions of the world. And that different conviction is this, that there is a moral obligation to love one another unconditionally, and therefore violence is antithetical to that, and it's not appropriate, it's not acceptable as an option." Any other belief, Greg argues, and the more I've thought about this, the more compelled I am by his argument, but any other belief, whether it's America is great, or what could be another one that you could have, even, well, I don't know about that. I guess that you would need a foundation for it, but like any type of patriotic, pro-country belief, up with people, anything. If the inherent dignity and the obligation to love isn't at the foundation, eventually your belief will result in violence. Any belief that doesn't rule out violence will eventually lead to violence. And the more I've meditated on that, the more I think that there's something right about it. And so, yeah, that was basically, I think that was the gist of his sermon. And what did you think of Greg's sermon?
First, thank you for that summary, Dan. It was really good. And it's always a good opportunity to be reminded of the different points that Greg hits, because there were a lot. Mm-hmm. I think overall, I want to say I enjoyed the sermon. I learned a lot. I'm contemplating a lot. But ultimately, I really appreciate that once again, we are taking the posture of, well, let's look at this. Let's have this conversation instead of, that's a bunch of hogwash, you bunch of sinners for thinking that way. How dare you? And you know what I mean? Because like Greg said, there are points to relativism that are quite compelling. And if just looking at the points at face value, you can go, oh, yeah, I can see why I can see the temptation to go there, given all of the crap that we encounter and deal with, given all of the ways in which, in Jesus' name, and I say that in quotes, people have done, and not just in other cultures and countries, like right here, people have done some pretty horrific things. So yeah, I get it. So I like it that he was like, hey, this is why it's compelling. However, this is also why this doesn't quite hold up. It's not looking at the full story. He didn't say it just means none of it. It just said it's like all hogwash. However, it doesn't tell the full story. And for me, the highlight moment was when he did say, and you just said it, Dan, anything that doesn't rule out violence will eventually rely on violence. It's just, I think that's the way it is. And I couldn't help it. Are you familiar? Of course you are. Lord of the Flies, that novel. Oh my God. Like,
yeah. Do you know?
To me, that's just.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, it's what's interesting is I have one of the best-selling study guides for Lord of the Flies on Amazon.com. So
what?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
So, yeah, I have
Hold
3
on.
study guides.
I got to get out my bingo card and I got to mark off what? Lord of the Flies study guide? Are you kidding me?
Well, that's how much I like that book. It was a good book. So
it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we could do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
But like, to me, there's a lot there that you go, yeah, like if violence is not off the table, eventually that's what we will resort to. Because what we're holding on to has to be defended at all costs. So yeah, I really enjoyed, I enjoyed the sermon a lot. I do want to spend a couple of minutes, if it's okay with you, Dan, I do want to spend a couple of minutes just looking at some of those reasons why relativism is so compelling. And the fact of the matter is, whether you think it's hogwash or not, it is a reality. Increasingly so. And we do know, like, I feel like I'm hearing it in a variety of different places and from a variety of sources that people are leaving the church as we know it. And I think we have to look at what's going on. And I think this is one of the issues there. But I know that Greg had an answer for his first point about the reason why relativism is so compelling. That first reason being that absolute truth claims are dangerous. And then he said, well, it's not that the claims necessarily are dangerous. It's the way in which they are carried out. And I can agree and still have some questions that I would love to throw your direction, because if someone is hearing something as an absolute claim in the name of God, let's just say, all they know in that moment is how that is impacting them, whether it's for the good or for not, whether it's abusive or not, whether it's violent or not. They don't, I think, in that moment have the wherewithal or the time or space or whatever to go, this person is saying this is an absolute truth in the name of God. It's affecting me this way. Maybe it's not really, maybe it's the person who's the issue and not the truth. Am I making sense? Like, I feel like people they don't always have the space or time to figure that out in the moment. And sometimes it's down the road where they look back and go, oh, that was actually not very healthy. That was really harmful. And so how can we combat this this argument for relativism in a more tangible way?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of like are you thinking of like because I'm thinking of like imperialism in Africa, where you have the British who they basically marched through the whole continent and tried to take over as many provinces as they could, and they sort of bulldozed their British culture over these civilizations that were there. Is that kind of what the danger that you're looking at?
Yeah, that. And then if you even take it like to modern day, people who, hate on certain people groups and literally in the name of God, like, relish in, calling them sinners and, just doing horrific things, and then like, I think then and even now we're seeing some of that. And so I think it's not always easy to say, it's the messenger, not the message. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really tough situation, because I look at things especially historically, before Christianity, even like during Christianity early on, for hundreds of years, even after Christianity, even in South America, when the Spanish came to South America, you would find these civilizations who had these belief structures where it really made sense to them to kill children, where you would throw them into the fire for their agricultural gods, and so the Spanish were like, that's horrible. And so through the use of force, they sort of took over a lot of these. But this is a horrible simplification of the history of this. But just to make the point, through force, they took over these places, and they were nasty people, the Spanish. However, in looking back on it, even though the Spanish did all of these really terrible things in these cultures, I think that most of humanity would look back and say child sacrifice was probably not a good thing. And it was probably a good thing that people stopped sacrificing their children to agricultural gods. But does that excuse the things that the Spanish conquistadors did? No, it does not. And so I look at the world and I just see that, God is at work in the world, and creating a people that reflect God's perfect love is a long, slow kind of process. And that, I think, when the Apostle Paul says that love is patient, there's a reason for that, because it takes a tremendous amount of patience in order to become loving in the way that God wants us to be. And so there are things that are happening where you can look at that and say, as a Christian, I think that is wrong. But what we've learned is that forcing people to agree with us might not be the best approach to getting them to see things from the way that we see it. Perhaps better approaches would be approaches that involve more listening and more presence and more relationship, because then we are like discussing these things not as one group that is threatening to take over, but as two groups that are trying to find peace with one another and trying to live together in this planet. And so I guess what I would say is that the message, the how is just as important as the what. But it's not easy, because you look at some of the things that we disagree with, like if child sacrifice was going on right now, I might be a little impatient about that,
Right.
And so it's not easy for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's important to say. It's not easy. And we can sit back, Monday morning quarterback it, Super Bowl. We could sit back and quarterback it from afar and go, ooh, we wouldn't have done it that way. Well, good. Who the heck knows, honestly, if you're going to defend innocence, right? Like, who the heck knows? And we don't have the answers. Merits a conversation. It does remind me, I have heard stories of missionaries, right? Of kingdom people, Jesus following people who would go into other cultures to evangelize, but recognize, these are folks who I feel like did it in a wise way, recognize that some of the things they were seeing in those cultures were horrific. And Greg mentioned some of those. And instead of saying, we came to bring Jesus to you and this is wrong, they had to sit back and let the culture do what the culture did as they formed relationships. And then once that trust was there, we're able to influence from within relationship instead of coming power over. And so I would not want to be in that situation, quite frankly. I don't know that I would have the patience to do it, but this is kind of where I'm going with this thread from the sermon, is that something that you're setting out to do, and say you have the power of God and you have the fortitude to go out and do something, the moment you turn or resort to violence to accomplish it, that's when it's an indicator you've swayed from the goal, because that's not how he would do it. What do you think about it? I mean, that's an oversimplification, but what do you think about that?
Well, and I think that's exactly the reason why, Jesus says, if my disciples were here to take over the world, they would be fighting. I mean, if they were living under a different kind of foundational set of beliefs, they would be going to war here, but they're not, because they have a different foundation. And you see this earlier on where Jesus says, you will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. This is the tell. And so I don't think you're far off. I think that's exactly right. Like, as soon as you resort to violence, you are kind of being antithetical toward that foundation, which is to love one another and to love our enemies and to serve instead of and to not seek revenge and things like that. So, but I was just thinking as you were talking, because you and I both strive to be kind of plant-based kind of eaters, and people who are watching the MuseCast right now might not see things the same way that you and I see things as it relates to food. And it's a good example, because I think when we look back in 50 years from now and we see people who are so addicted to meat that we have these industries set up where we give chickens caffeine so that they stay awake longer, so that they eat more, so that they bulk up more, so that they could be slaughtered for people to eat. And we inject them with salt to add weight to them so that we can charge more for them. And so we have these people who are eating these products that are causing heart disease and that are increasing the salt in their system and leading to inflammation, which leads to all sorts of autoimmune issues. I think when we look back at that, we're going to say, wow, that is really messed up. Maybe not quite at the level of child sacrifice, but wow, is that messed up. But now when you go and tell people, hey, I think that the meat industry is something's wrong with that, and I think that people should eat plants, people get really defensive. They're like, you can't tell me what to eat. And, there's a research study that says that eating poultry is good for you. And, they always have stuff, but you see how hard it is to get people to even have a conversation about things that you think might be really wrong. And so, like I said, it's not easy. And I can imagine, South American shaman, if you were to challenge the whole industry of child sacrifice, they would probably have some logical reasons why things are done like that. And so I think it takes a tremendous amount of patience and relationship and persistence. And
I think we have to start at it with a different posture with these kinds of things. We can't start with, I'm right and I know I'm right. They're wrong and I know they're wrong. They're going to try to convince me, but just wait. I will be the one that does the convincing. Like, that's not going to get us very far. I think we have to start out of the gate with patience, like you said, humility, like you've talked about, and just a place of tolerance. And I don't mean tolerance is one of those words right now that can, kind of be a bad word, but being like, okay, I can absolutely know morally that something is wrong, but if I approach it with the wrong heart posture, I'm not going to do any good. So is it more important to get my message across, or is it more important to influence in a way in which would bring about change, like genuine change? And I just think those are things we have to think through, and not always easy. Because if it were easy, it would have been done. Yeah, indeed. Okay, one other point that Greg brought up in regards to the reason why relativism is so compelling that I wanted to get your take on a little bit. And you guys, just FYI, Dan doesn't know what I'm going to ask him. So he's on the hot seat and we're just throwing things at him and seeing how he responds. So you guys can be the judge of that. Okay, what are the odds? Like, what are the odds? I loved that point, absolute truth claims are highly improbable. Whatever you believe it to be true. So otherwise you wouldn't believe it. So that whole argument of, well, what are the odds that you happen to have the truth? Like, what is your compelling argument against that?
Well, it's one of those cases where the issue is structured in a very creative way. 40,000 possibilities, and I think that I got the right one. What are the odds? I mean, it's sort of made to feel that way. But when you actually look at the 40,000 possibilities, what you find are some pretty basic core agreements across all of those 40,000 ways. And so, a lot of times, a church will be different, or a denomination will be different because of something that's pretty minor. And so, you might agree on things like, the fact that there is a creator, and that creator is personal, and then that creator created the universe out of nothing, and that creator became one of us in the form of Jesus, and that creator gave us the scripture as a revelation of what that creator is like, and so on and so forth. But then you get down to, how do we celebrate this creator? Well, you absolutely cannot have instruments in your congregation, that you have to just use your voice and sing together, and drums and guitars. That's a distraction. That's not appropriate. And it's like, well, we agree on so much, but like there's just these little tiny disagreements that create,
or you can't dare have a woman do anything in leadership. That's right. Yeah. Or, that's even, or you have to take communion in this way or that. Yes. So,
right.
Sorry. Go on.
Yeah. So that's basically my point, is that underneath these 40,000 denominations, there's usually way more that they have in common. And so, I think that I found truth at Woodland Hills, but there are things that Greg and I kind of disagree about, even within this church. So that's part of the joy of learning to love together, is that we don't see things exactly the same. And, but that's part of what a relational body involves. So that's what I would say about that.
I'm giggling because I knew that I was going to be compelled by your answer, that I started, eating some nuts and cranberries, like it was popcorn, just, tune it in.
That's good.
But I love the direction that your answer went, because I can honestly say, full transparency, that I have never been a part of a religious organization like Woodland Hills, in which, absolute 100% alignment is not a requirement.
Yeah.
You literally just said that there are things that you and Greg don't see the same. We have heard, and they have debated and talked about how Greg and Paul don't see things the same. And on our pastoral team, we don't all see things the same. But that's not a disqualifier for the relationship, working together, serving together, and, trying to bring about the kingdom together. Like,
that's right.
We major on the majors and minor on the minors. And there's not a lot. And I'm not trying to toot our horn, maybe just a little bit, but really, toot. There's not a lot of places where that's allowed. Like, you have to, it's 100% alignment, or out the door you go. And I think if we could take that attitude of, again, tolerance and patience and just loving one another through, I think we'd get a lot further with some of these things. Totally. That we are fighting over and about. So I don't know. I just think it's fascinating, and I'm so thankful for it. And I think our whole thing about dogma, doctrine, opinion, that's not something that I've heard other places. And I think people really think that, not really. I really think people think that behind closed doors, like, we're just like, yes, Greg, whatever you say, Greg. And that could not be further from the truth.
That's right.
We love and respect him, but he also loves and respects us. And there's a give and take there, which I think is fantastic and beautiful.
Yeah. Well, you raise a really good point, because, I went to college, and I didn't know anybody, and I wasn't part of this church when I went to college. And I just talk about your beliefs are based on luck. I mean, I lucked into my theology class, was Paul Eddy's first theology class as a professor, as a full professor, and there I was in the front row. And so that was my exposure to Paul Eddy, and that got me into kind of Woodland Hills and to Greg Boyd. And so this whole doctrine, dogma, opinion thing, or dogma, doctrine, opinion, sort of I've always known that since I've been a thinking Christian, but you're right. That's just not a common thing. And I hope someday that it is, because it really does help us. What it allows it allows us to know that we are together on the important things, but like, then the minors, as you call them, those are kind of flourishes. Those make relationships fun. And, Greg and I will, he'll accuse me of being a Pelagian, and he and Paul go back and forth about Arminianism and God's relationship to time. And that's just part of our fun now. And so then a difference can become a good thing that actually helps us bond instead of pushes us apart. And I just think that's so valuable.
That's good, Dan. I feel like this is one of those conversations that could go on for a while. And I feel like there's many threads that we could pull at. However, the series is really kind of just starting, and we'll have other opportunities. And I think some of this stuff will, come back up. So I think this is a good time to land the plane, as it were. And you may not know this, Dan, because you certainly didn't do it last week, but the way in which we do that, the way in which we wrap things up nicely and put a bow on top, is Nugget time. And so we are going to enter into that portion of the show.
Wow.
It is Nugget time. So I would like for you, good sir, to share a final point for our MuseCast community.
Yeah, that's funny, because I'm a little rusty because I haven't done Nugget time in a couple of weeks. So I don't have anything prepared. So I think what I would say is, I think coming around, I really like the point that you just raised, and I'm going to steal that, because I think that when you can when you can see the things that are absolutely essential to your faith and see things that are not essential, it really allows you to live authentically and joyfully with others, even when you have those disagreements. And that is so great. The other thing it does too is it allows you to be teachable. It allows you to not take yourself so seriously, because when you're in churches where you have to agree on our 64 theses, well, goodness, I mean, talk about walking on eggshells all the time. I mean, that's who wants to live like that? How do you have fun when you can get kicked out of the church if you step out of line on Axis 42 on our statement of theses? I mean, there's no joy there. There's no fun. So I just think that having Christ at the center, having Jesus at the center, and put everything else in its place after that is it's just so liberating. And so the more we can live like that, the better. That would be my summary nugget, is what I would say.
You were covered well, sir. Good job. I'm going to give you a thumbs up. I'm not giving you a MuseCast high five, but I will give you a thumbs up.
And
I'm going to piggyback off of your nugget. This is okay. Yeah, Jesus at the center, like that is the core. That's the bullseye, right? And I just want us to again give Jesus a little more credit than I think we give him. And if we are looking at other people, other quote unquote believers, and I say quote unquote because sometimes we deem whether or not someone is a believer or not because we've determined they're not acting the way they should. Other cultures, and if we are thinking that's not what a Christian should be doing, or how, guess what? Again, if you're not invited into that space, and you can't influence it through relationship, then just, let's just not say anything. But more than that, my real point is this: let's give Jesus a little more credit. We've said it a million times. He is creative. He is wise, and his love is for all. And so I have to believe that he will go to any extent to express that love. And we just may not see it or understand it. We don't know how he's working, how he's moving, what the Spirit is doing. All we know is what we see. Let's give Jesus a little more credit to say, okay, hopefully there's a work going on there that I don't see, that I don't understand, but he has it. So that's what I'm going to say. Take our hands off of some of that and let him be God.
That's good. That's awesome.
All right. Well, Dan, tanned Dan, we are at the end of our show for today, just for today. And we will absolutely be back next week. And these sermons, there's going to be a lot of thought-provoking discussion that come from these sermons throughout this series. And so we just encourage you to continue to dig in, lean in, plug in, and join us in the chat later on as we discuss this when the show airs, and continue, like, ask questions, send those in. Like, this is something that we need to be dialoguing more than just once. So we encourage you to do that.
Yep.
Anything else, Dan?
Happy Valentine's Day if you celebrate Valentine's Day.
Yeah. If you have in a quarrel with someone, then reconcile.
That's
reconcile. Right. We did it.
Go back, watch the tape. We demonstrated it. So
yeah, that's how it works. Very easy. All right. Have a wonderful day, guys. We'll catch you next time.